Hi, Roper families. My name is Dr. Jill Walsh. I'm a professor at Boston University, and I've made this series of videos to help you think through some tech choices, decisions you might want to make around technology in your child's life and in your family's life. And in this video, I want to talk about the rules you should have at home and why rules are important. But before I get into the specifics, I want to start off by saying that you should do whatever matches your values and is working for you. So first of all, if you have something that you're doing that is working really well that I don't mention here, please keep it. Anything that's working, do not change. And second, if there is something I don't mention that's really important to you as a family around your values, please think about that. If there's something I mentioned that doesn't match your values, please feel free to do something different. I really think about all of the suggestions I'm going to give you in this series of videos as a buffet. Take from it whatever you want. You can try a bunch of things. You can try a few things first and then go back and try some other things, however you want to use this. The other thing I wanted to say is that I am making this video to try to sort of bridge and span a variety of age ranges. And I will try in the videos to indicate where adjustments might be needed around different age groups, right? So for example, I would not suggest the same thing around rules for a third grader that I would for a 12th grader, right? And so there are some key adjustments we want to make, but in general around rules, what I would say is those standard rules that always apply. They apply to teaching, in my classes as well at Boston University. Starting off a little bit stricter and then gradually sort of loosening the reins is a little bit easier than starting looser and trying to get stricter, right? So just thinking about that. And then the reason for rules in general. Okay, so this is the big one. If you are on the fence of like, why does this stuff matter? Or you're thinking, I can't really keep track of this, so why would I put in a bunch of rules that I can't enforce? I really want to speak to that first. So the reason that rules are so important is because what we know about adolescent brain development. So here's the thing. I know that all of the children at Roper are amazing and they're all so great and doing so many amazing things. But even your oldest, even your wisest cannot manage this stuff alone. Okay. So the reality is when a person is ready to manage their technology on their own based on brain development is age 25. And I'm going to highlight this in a couple of videos because I really want it to sink in that basically the critical thing here is that we are asking children to do something they're not developmentally ready to do, right? We would not ask them to operate a car at age 10. You would say that's bananas. They're not ready to do that. The same is true of this. They're really not in any place to manage this until age 25. And you might know off the top of your head some people who are older than 25 who really struggle to manage this, right? So brain development alone doesn't necessarily mean they're capable of managing it, but it's at least a start. And so the reason that that's important to highlight is that because none of the children at Roper are older than 25, it means they are going to need support, guidance, and a lot of rules, right? And so this is why rules are essential because we're fundamentally giving them something that they aren't ready to manage on their own. Okay, so with that preface, what rules do I think are important? And again, buffet. So take from this what you want. The first rule that I do think applies to everyone, regardless of grade, age, ability, brain development, all of it, is keeping phones out of bedrooms. Okay, so I have 2 teenagers at home and I actually require that they do not charge their phones and or bring their phones to their rooms at night. It's just too darn tempting. There is a slight nuance, right? So younger kids, I would say no phones in bedrooms at any time. And actually I just said phones, but that would be true of tablets, computers, anything like that. They really just shouldn't be in bedrooms. They should be in public spaces in your home. Now I'll talk about why that's important in the monitoring video, but trust me, it's a really good rule to set precedent around. For younger kids and older kids, the rule certainly applies at night. So while I wouldn't expect a 17-year-old to never take their phone to their room, I do think it's fair to say no phones in the bedrooms at night. This is critical for 2 reasons. One of the things is that the more hidden technology tends to be, aka in the bedroom with the door closed, the more likely it is that kids find themselves in spaces they perhaps wouldn't seek out in more public places. There's a lot more that can go wrong, right? You really can't see reactions, all of that's happening. That's one reason. And more of that happens at night, I should say. The second reason that I say no phones at night is because it really has a very clear negative impact on sleep. One of the things we know is that sleep is essential for teens' psychosocial well-being, kids' psychosocial well-being, and adult psychosocial well-being. And so if we can do anything to protect sleep, we need to do it. So please, whether they are 7 or they are 17, they should have an alarm clock that functions that isn't their phone, and phones should charge somewhere else. And by the way, this is also true of adults. It's just too darn tempting to look at that late at night, and you all know it doesn't help. Okay, so rule number 1 is around phones in bedrooms. Slight nuance about, daytime use, but certainly for everyone at night. The second rule I want to highlight is setting up spaces in your home or times of day. So it could be a space, it could be a time of day that is tech-free for everyone in your family. Now, examples could be the bedroom. That's one that I use in my family. But it could also be mealtime. It could be like the table where you eat. Whenever people come to that table, they don't bring a device. It could be, I'm just making this up, it could be Sunday afternoons. You take 2 hours and nobody uses devices. It doesn't have to be the same as other people, right? So for some people, meals work really well. For other people with, chaos and schedules and all that sort of stuff, dinner doesn't work. But what you want to do is pick something that's doable, right? That you can all sort of meet, and set it as a tech-free time/space, right? So using that Sunday afternoon, it might be that Sunday afternoon, I'm just making this up, from 2 to 4, we don't use devices in this house and we do other stuff. Now, I am not saying that every Sunday from 2 to 4, you have to plan a super creative, really exciting activity or outing. That is not what I am saying. Actually, it will be okay if your children are super, super bored and complaining. Boredom is really good for development and identity formation. Time to space out, really, really good. Like, kids actually need to be more bored, if you ask me. So I'm totally fine with it being boring. If you want to plan something, you absolutely can, but it does not have to be grand. In my family, we sometimes will do games together. Sometimes we'll take the dog for a walk. Sometimes we all just hang out in our own corners and, I might read, one of my kids might reorganize her closet, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The key thing is that there's space away from technology. What we're trying to build in there is kind of the reverse mindset of, you've probably used technology when they were younger as a reward, right? You get technology use. What we want to start incorporating is we also need breaks from technology. We need spaces and times where we are not seeking out a device. So that's why that rule is really important. The third rule that I really would encourage you to think about is thinking about the amount of time kids are on devices in one sitting. So I know you're all paying attention to the amount of time over the course of a day, especially with younger kids, that they're spending in front of screens, and that's wonderful. I really appreciate that. The research, however, in the last few years is suggesting that while that is still important, overall amount of time, what might be as important, if not more important, if I'm being honest, is the amount of time in one sitting. Now, there's no perfect amount of time, right? It's not, I cannot say to you, 18 minutes and they will never encounter anything bad and all of their interactions will be lovely. I cannot do that, right? Of course, anything bad could happen or they could see something. But what we do know is the longer prolonged use has a couple of key impacts. First, the algorithms push you further and further away from where you started, the longer you're there, right? The algorithm knows we're going to get bored. If I go there looking at puppy videos, I'm not going to watch puppy videos for half an hour. It's going to start pushing me to content. And that's often why kids find themselves in spaces they didn't intend to look at, perhaps looking at more controversial things, or maybe just not age appropriate things. Let's put it that way. The second thing we know is that the more prolonged use we have, there's that expense, right? There's an opportunity cost. What are we not doing, right? So if I'm playing video games for an hour, what am I not doing with that hour, right? Now, I'm not suggesting everyone has to do math problems with that hour, but it might be nice to get a little outside time. It might be nice to hang out with a friend or something like that. Again, it's thinking about that opportunity cost of what's happening with these prolonged use. The third thing that I would highlight is there is some really interesting research over the last couple of years around dopamine and dopamine addiction. And one of the things we know is that our dopamine cycles actually want to level set, right? So I'm going to get that peak of, I start playing the video game or I start looking at social media and I'm so fired up. And then my dopamine's going to reset itself and go back to my sort of status quo. What's going to happen in my brain is that I'm going to actually start chasing that dopamine. So I'm going to be like, I need to play more of this. I need to get to that next level in that game. I need to see everything that got posted in my feed, right? My brain's actually chasing dopamine. And of course, that can lead to addictive behaviors. We all seek out dopamine, but what we are seeing is that technology use is really sort of creating a dopamine cycle that does mirror addiction patterns. And if you're interested in this, Anna Lembke wrote a great book a few years ago, called Dopamine Nation, where she really lays this out around technology use. I would encourage you to start there. So what do I say then? Given that I'm telling you up front, there's no gold standard around time. Less is always more. I do think 20 to 30 minutes based on my work with teens and children seems to be manageable. So it gives them enough time to feel connected, to know what's going on. They've perhaps been able to play a game, and get through the whole game in half an hour. Not all games, but some. But it gives them enough time to feel settled, but it isn't so long that they're getting pushed down that algorithm cycle or getting caught up in the dopamine hits. And so that's what I aim for. Again, I'm telling you there's no gold standard. It is not the case that 32 minutes is awful and 29 minutes is amazing, right? I'm just saying I roughly try to aim for that. And just to give you a sense, I actually do that in my own social media use. I limit myself on Instagram. That would be my kryptonite. I have to limit myself, and I do it at 30 minutes for me a day. Right. And that is just because I know I need to connect. It's important to me, but longer will send me down rabbit holes and create all sorts of other things. So I would really think about that. Connected to this, though, this is the really hard piece about this 20 to 30 minutes. If you have different children in your household, you might find that one kid really struggles with 20 to 30 minutes around video game play, but the other child doesn't struggle with it on video games. But that child might struggle with it around group chats or whatever it is, right? So we're all going to have different things that are really hard. And so we might have this rule of 30 minutes, but each person is going to need a little more support around certain platforms. So just keeping that in mind and really thinking about how to tailor these rules to each kid is critical. The next thing is really thinking about multitasking. So any rule you can establish that limits multitasking is a good one. Now, multitasking you've probably thought about in terms of, obviously it's not helpful to do a math worksheet and watch something on YouTube at the same time, right? So we think about it often in an academic context, and that's great. I also want us to think about it in a social or fun context. So what I mean by that is we also don't want to multitask our fun, which might include a Netflix show, my phone, and something else going on, right? We can multitask fun things. The reason why we don't want to multitask in any capacity is because actually multitasking elicits a cortisol response, a stress response in our bodies, right? Our brain is like, where do you want me to look? Over here, what am I doing? And no matter what we're multitasking, we're actually going to elevate our cortisol levels in our body. I don't know about you. I don't need to be more stressed. I got that under control. So anything I can do to limit that is really important. Now, this next category isn't really a rule, but it's a couple of things I want to think through. If there's any, again, back to that buffet, this list is going to be specific to you. So I'm just going to give you the broad category, but things around expectations around behaviors, how you want your child to respond to things, what's okay to look at and what isn't. Those are really critical to set with your child when they're younger. You can obviously adjust as they get older, but it's really important to set expectations. Now, you might be thinking, well, how could I possibly set expectations when I can't see everything that they're doing? I hear you. I still think it's important to set the expectations, right? So you're going to want to think through, and I'll cover some examples in some of the other videos, but you're going to want to talk through with them, how do you expect them to act if somebody says something offensive in a group chat? What should they do if they encounter a video that, it makes them uncomfortable on YouTube? What if somebody is really mean to them? Right? Going through different scenarios and setting your expectations of how they should act when we aren't around is actually really critical for them. And they need to hear that from us. A lot of them actually don't really know, to be honest, what they're supposed to do. And you might think it's obvious. It isn't quite as obvious to them. And then piggybacking on that, once you've set up your expectations, the second part is establishing what they should do if they encounter these things. So, do you want them to come talk to you? Should they erase their history on YouTube? Whatever it is, right? Thinking through the specifics of how they should handle it. Now, how do you enforce it, right? What do you do? Okay, so you set all these rules. How do you enforce the rules? You can absolutely and should do some spot checking, and I'll cover that in the monitoring video. You can ask them to show you stuff, so you can ask them to look at their feeds, what they're seeing. You can set screen time parameters. I talked about how I use screen time on my own phone to limit my own use. You should make sure they have to get permission to download. All of that stuff I will cover in the monitoring video. But the critical thing about this is that for some of this, you're going to know if let's say if you say no phones from 2 to 4 on Sunday and you find them in their room using their phone, right? That's a rule where it'll be fairly obvious if they've broken it or not. Some of these other rules are going to be hard for us to know. We can't see them, right? And so we do have to cede a little bit of that ability and trust over to them when we give them the phone. And I know that's hard, and that's why I might encourage you to think about if you really feel like, wow, I could never trust my child to follow through on any of this stuff, they're probably not ready for a phone, and that's okay, right? So using this as a gut check to think through what your child's ready for is really critical. The last thing about rules, I do not want to sugarcoat this. There's zero scenarios where let's say you pick 2 of these and you say, okay, I want to start with that for this fall, that your child is going to be like, oh my goodness, this is so amazing. Thank you for these rules, right? That's not going to happen, okay? There's going to be conflict. They're going to be mad about it. They might break the rules. You might have to adjust the rule as you see that like, wow, Sunday afternoon did not work for us. We need to do something different. That is okay, right? What we're doing here is we're building a set of skills and they take a while to be established. So I don't recommend you try everything all at once. It would be a lot. What I would suggest is you pick your pain point, the thing that causes the most friction in your house around technology, and establish a rule around that. And hopefully from this array I gave you, you have something to work with. Start there, see something that has impact, and then build on that and then add rules as you go. I hope this gets you started. There are nuances and specificities, but I hope that you can adjust for your families. But I do believe that rules are very important. They are essential for kids around this, again, because they are not ready to manage this on their own. Good luck.